Welcome to Discovery Watch with John Kaiser.
I'm your host, Jim Goddard. John, you had a busy November participating in a couple of mini conferences in Vancouver and San Francisco. I understand you're following up on a number of new Discovery Watch ideas, some of which you want to share with us today. But before you do, are there any updates for existing Discovery Watch juniors?
Well, one of the companies that presented in San Francisco at the 49 North Conference was New Legacy Gold Corp, which we introduced a while back based on the very interesting intersection that they pulled on their Iceberg project in Nevada, which is just to the southeast, about 10 kilometers from Barrick's Gold Rush discovery, 15 million ounces of fairly high grade. And they had drilled this target several years ago, a deep hole, came up with so-so results, the right geological context, but not any interesting mineralization. So they have been focused a bit farther south, where there is outcropping range-front rocks, where they're trying to develop a 50 to 100 million ton low-grade, 0.9, 1 gram per ton oxide gold system that could be, open pit mined and heap leached. But they went back there and to follow up this big IP anomaly, which is a sulfide system. And in this area here, it's under the gravels of the basin. It's completely blind. They drilled another hole, and at about 400 meter depth, which is pretty deep, they picked up 200 meters of 0.626 gram per ton gold, and it was all in this sort of pyritic, carbonaceous type setting, classic Carlin style system. This is what one would call a, smoke. It's not economic, hopelessly uneconomic at that grade and at that depth. However, it is the kind of smoke you see around a high-grade Carlin-type fire. And so they started a couple of weeks ago, they started a deep 700-meter core hole. And the other holes were drilled with reverse circulation, which gives you a whole bunch of little chips that aren't very helpful in interpreting, what the structure is and so on. This time they're drilling what they call a stratigraphic core hole so they can better understand the stratigraphy and set the stage for a more extensive and lower cost reverse circulation drill program in the new year. So this hole is about halfway down. They expect to have assays by the first week of January. They won't be able to tell whether they have anything because this type of mineralization, it's all micron gold. It's essentially invisible. And we could get a surprise. They could get lucky and show us, wow, the grade has improved by stepping 50 meters to the east and tagging into the enriched structures where the gold concentrated. Or they could simply get more information helping them position. So that's kind of a fun thing that we're looking at right now heading into the new year.
New Legacy announced a $9 million financing at 45 cents in early October, but the stock is now trading at 25 cents. Did any of that financing get done, and why is the stock down?
Well, a couple of reasons. First, their ability to go after a $9 million financing was created by the market's awareness that hole signaled that they were on the peripheries of something potentially very big, a potential world-class discovery worth more than $1 billion. But at the same time, we had two things going wrong. One, gold has continued to decline since peaking in mid-August, and that has certainly put a chill on the market. And the other thing is they had done a private placement in July, a $6 million financing at 30 cents with a 45-cent warrant, and that started coming due in early November. And of course, it's the usual, these was scattered amongst 132 places. As usual, people are selling the long position and clipping the full 45-cent warrant, saying, I want the free lunch on this. I don't want any exposure. So, of course, this helped grind the stock down to the 30 cents level, now even below that. So that selling has stopped. People say, I might as well wait for to see what this whole does. But they did manage to get about 4.5 million done out of the $9 million financing before the price got so low that everybody said, we're not doing something when the market price is below the 45-cent financing price. But they do have $16.5 million working capital, which is the best shape the company has ever been in. And so it doesn't really matter that they didn't have to suffer the full dilution of the entire $9 million financing.
New Legacy is clearly an example of traditional grassroots discovery exploration running into smoke, indicative of a potential big fire. Did you come across any other juniors engaged in grassroots exploration that piqued your interest?
Well, during the Metals Investor Forum, that was on the 12th and 13th of November, I had a chance to sit down with Ian Bliss and go through his story with Northern Shield Resources. Now, I picked up some buzz in the May conference that a lot of people were intrigued by what Northern Shield was doing in the Labrador Trough of northern Quebec. And this was my first chance to actually understand why this is definitely a play that deserves to be on our Discovery Watch list. Now, Northern Shield is one of these academic-type companies that uses a lot of scientific techniques to look for regions that are potentially prospective. Their focus in the past decade has been magmatic, nickel, copper, platinum group targets, and they were focused in the area southeast of the Ring of Fire in northern Ontario, where Noront created a very big splash in 2007 with its Eagle nickel, copper, platinum group discovery. That deposit turned out to be too small for a standalone mining operation. But Free West, which had found a chromite deposit, the Black Thor chromite deposit, ended up being bought out by Cliffs, and Cliffs was going to develop North America's first major chromite mine and produce chromium from a major facility, refinery in Ontario. The problem is Ontario has not dealt very well with its First Nations issues, and in this particular area, it was difficult to get a consensus on how to go ahead with developing anything. And even at the exploration permitting level, there were endless delays. Ontario has kind of developed this attitude of, we're not going to really settle any of these land claims issues. You go deal with the native groups locally and make them happy so that they'll give the green light for whatever exploration program you want to get to. But this is kind of like an unofficial form of almost indirect corruption, and companies have found it very difficult to move ahead. Cliffs ended up pulling out and selling everything to Noront, which is now backed by the Resource Capital Funds Group. And Cliffs, of course, ran into its own problems with the Bloom Lake iron project at the southern end of the Labrador Trough, when its price went down and a hedge fund that had bought too much ended up kicking out management. Northern Shield, by about 2014, had seen the writing on the wall and had turned its attention to the Labrador Trough because it had observed that here was an area of a lot of magmatic, ultramafic, and mafic rocks, gabbros and all of that had undergone depletion. And when rocks have undergone depletions, it means that a lot of the natural elements that are in it have ended up somewhere else. So they decided, let's work in this jurisdiction. Quebec has a much friendlier system. The native groups are easier to work with up there. And so they spent the last couple years focusing in this area. Now, they ended up homing in on a lake bottom sediment anomaly that the government had generated decades ago, and it runs about 100 kilometers in a north-south direction. And most of exploration activity in the past had centered at the southern end for two reasons. One was the ice direction was assumed to be from north to south, so all this copper and nickel that was showing up in these lake bottom sediments had presumably, or from south to north it was assumed, and it had been dragged northwards. And that bias was reinforced by the presence of the Lac Ready nickel showings, which were at the supposed head of this train. Northern Shield went and rethought the glacial history and said, they've got it backwards. It's just a coincidence that Lac Ready is at the at the supposed head of this train. The train is actually from north to south. So they started doing prospecting in this area, came up with the Huckleberry prospect. They farmed that out to South 32 this year, and South 32 has drilled a couple thousand meters and seven holes or so. Came up with a nickel, copper, platinum group mineralization, but not really good enough to be an ore body. They'll have to look harder to find the sort of higher grades needed to develop something. But what has the company quite excited is about 10 kilometers to the east is the Sequoia project, which is a completely overburden covered area. The geophysics shows a major ultramafic body, and additional geophysics has shown that there appear to be a number of conductors which are interpreted to be potential pools of massive sulfides. And in these magmatic segregation systems, what you have a big magma chamber, and Voisey's Bay is a classic example. Norilsk is another classic example. And what happens is if this intrudes into country rocks that are rich in sulfur, the sulfur ends up being digested and dissolved into the magma. The metals within the magma, they have a natural affinity for sulfur, so they form sulfides. They tend to be more dense. However, this fluid continues to be mobile, and if there are sort of pathways, conduits, it gets pushed out through these conduits, and if there are little traps or like little pockets, embayments within these feeder systems, the massive sulfides will settle out into the bottom of them and form classic deposits such as the ovoid, which was 30 million tons of sort of 4% nickel and 3% copper. So because this area is all overburden, the company has decided to just bite the bullet. They're in there now with a 1,000-meter drill program of about 5 to 7 fairly shallow holes. They are targeting these conductor targets. They're hoping to confirm that, in fact, this is a big, giant magmatic body, and its footprint is substantially larger than that of the Voisey's Bay system. It's more comparable to Norilsk. If over this Christmas period here they actually tag into massive sulfide, or at least evidence that this is indeed a nickel, copper, platinum group mineralized system, then they have the focus for a much more serious follow-up program next year.
Discovery Watch with John Kaiser will be right back after the break.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
GEM International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond producing country in Africa, located next to the 4th largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109 carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. GEM International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
Welcome back to Discovery Watch with John Kaiser. John, did anything catch your attention that involves innovative use of exploration technology while you were at those conferences in Vancouver and San Francisco?
Well, last September, I put out a new spec value hunter recommendation of San Marco Resources based on its adoption of Aster technology to generate previously unrecognized alteration systems in the state of Sonora in Mexico. And they had teamed up with Richard Osman's Globetrotters group, which had applied this technology successfully in Peru, where they found a copper deposit, which is now owned or optioned by Lundin Mining, which is drilling off a major new discovery. Now, what Aster data is, it was in 1999, the USGS and the Japan Ministry of Japan put a satellite into orbit whose purpose was to collect 14 spectral bands of data. Basically, it is light reflected from the Earth. And the purpose for this was to create a time series map of the world, which could be used for analyzing vegetation changes, earthquake activity, other type of climate change related things. And of course, the data is free, or at least has been free for the past 10 years. And it is of interest to geologists because really what you're looking for is not so much what is reflected, but what is not reflected. So certain minerals absorb light rays or light, and certain minerals are associated with alteration systems, the clay and so on, that is formed when a fluid system pumps an area and alters the original chemistry of the rock, bleaches it, and so on. And you don't necessarily see this because vegetation or other sort of stuff can be blocking it. But when you crunch it with this, looking at this aster data, you can see such anomalies show up. Now, lots of groups had done that in the last while, but what they used was software that was based on hyperspectral data collected on a much more local scale with 10 times the resolution of this satellite data. And what happened was it generated way too much noise. And what Richard Osman's group did was spend, several years playing with this data, coming up with algorithms so that they could get rid of a lot of the noise and actually generate targets. Now, it isn't such a simple sniper system that you run this software and lo and behold, here's your deposit. They teamed up with Bob Willis's San Marco team because they generated 1,000 potential alteration systems within Sonora State. So what the junior did was use all its historical knowledge about the area to go through all these targets and eliminate all these areas that simply have the wrong geology. And then they eliminated all the known mines and other systems where there's some reason that nothing can ever be developed. Perhaps it's already owned by a major. And so they basically reduced these 1,000 targets to about 30 prospective targets which are available for acquisition. And the company has now been quietly scouting out these areas, finding out who the landowners are, negotiating for it. And the plan is to have, by the end of next year, 12 brand new systems, a portfolio of brand new systems that have never been subjected to modern exploration, that could be either copper porphyry systems, or they could be gold silver epithermal systems. So it's a way of generating targets using an innovative science-based technology approach and being able to get title to it fairly cheaply.
Does San Marco have anything yet that deserves to be watched closely for a near-term discovery?
Well, this is what surprised me at the Metals Investor Forum when Bob Willis gave his presentation for San Marco. He explained the aster strategy fairly briefly, and of course it's a technical topic, and they only had sort of 10 minutes to explain the story to the audience. But he really focused hard on the Chunibas project that they own 100% of, and I was wondering, what is going on here? Well, it turns out that this project was drilled in the late 90s by another junior, Castle Gold, which got absorbed by Argonaut Gold for its El Castillo project. And that past work had targeted a number of exposed mineralized shear zones within a granodiorite monzonite intrusive. And there was mineralization there, but it wasn't really of continuous high grade enough to justify immediate follow-up, especially given that the company had another focus. And a couple of years ago, Argonaut came under pressure from its board. You are a gold producer and gold mine developer. What are you doing with these exploration projects? Get rid of them. So Bob Willis was able to do a deal for San Marco where he acquired both the Chunibas and the nearby much larger Mariana project for basically what amounts to a royalty. So they have these two legacy projects. And interestingly, the aster strategy has already identified within the larger Mariana project 2 alteration systems that were not previously recognized, and will eventually get follow-up when certain archaeological permitting issues have been resolved with that project. But Bob and his team went to the Chenevas project and looked at it a lot closer. They put a crew on the field to map it and sample it more extensively. And what they have learned is that structurally, this whole area, this 500 meter by 1,000 meter area, is much busier than previously assumed. There is now evidence that there were multiple mineralizing pulses that pumped this system, and the extent of the gold-silver values that they get from prospecting is bigger than the initial focus. So Bob thinks we have two potential targets here. One, it's possible that the main area, when it's properly drilled on a systematic grid, could yield a bulk tonnage open-pit mineable gold system such as Fort Knox or Round Mountain systems, or because they now believe this is an intermediate sulfidation system, that if they drill deeper, they could find bigger, richer, more continuous zones than is apparent at surface. So they're gearing up for an exploration, for a drilling program in early 2017 to test for a potential bulk tonnage, large ounce system, or a higher grade underground mineable system. So for the shareholders of the company, this is great. They got the longer term strategy of generating these grassroots alteration systems that nobody has ever really looked at hard in a region that's very prospective for gold, silver, epithermal systems and copper porphyry systems. And they have potential for a discovery surprise during the first half of 2017.
What about the third discovery exploration type, rethinking existing deposits?
Well, one of the companies that I finally sat down with to really go through their stories is Radium Resources, which owns the old O'Brien mine halfway between Val-d'Or and Rouyn-Noranda in Quebec, associated with the Cadillac Larder Break. Now, the O'Brien mine was operated at a fairly small scale, less than 1,000 tons per day from 1926 to 1954. It was at the time one of the highest grade mines in the Abitibi Greenstone Belt. Churned out about 600,000 ounces of equivalent of half-ounce gold. Some breakwater held it during the 90s, but ended up becoming focused on zinc. Radisson acquired it in the late 90s, did some work on it, but had other projects that were a primary focus. Several years ago, shareholders became unhappy with management, and Mario Bouchard was put in charge of turning this company around. The project has about 300,000 ounces of 6-gram material left in place to the east of the old O'Brien workings, which went down to about 1,100 meters. These resources only go down about 500 meters. Between the two zones, 36E and Kiwagama, there's kind of a gap where the company figured maybe we can, down to a 500-meter depth, we can come up with another 600,000 ounces in this area, get it close to 1 million ounces, which makes this very interesting. It's in an area where they could mine it and truck the ore to other mills which have capacity in the area. So they launched a 6,000-meter drill program in the summer, which came back with decent results showing that this is underway now. And they are now in the midst of another 10,000-meter drill program, moving a bit further to the west, closer to the O'Brien mine, and also continuing to put together enough density of drilling so that by the third quarter of next year they can generate a brand new resource. And of course there's a tantalizing hole that was drilled in 2003 at about 7-8 or about 1,000 meter depth, which shows that mineralization is present. So there is still another 500 meters of vertical extent that could end up revealing something very exciting, making this thing much bigger than it was in the past. For now, they're in there rethinking this system, exploring for shoots in parts where it was assumed there was nothing, and trying to put together a resource of 500,000 to 1 million ounces of underground mineable material.
John, thanks for the update.
You're welcome.
You've been listening to John Kaiser from KaiserResearch.com. Discovery Watch will be back next week. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on Discovery Watch are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at HowStreet.com. Discovery Watch is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.